your comments down below. Dave, were you aware that the national grid today is only putting out about 6% wind power and 60 odd percent gas powered electricity? Is this the end of the grid? Is this the end of renewable energy? We're transforming the grid into renewable. Are we going to have times when we're not going to have enough power and we're going to have blackouts? Lots of viewers have made this comment, so let's have a look. I'm Dave. This is Dave Takes It On, and we're going to have a look at the national grid. Now, it's been really interesting for the last few days, and many of you have pointed this out to me, that today, for example, the amount of gas, it varies because you can do live viewing of the actual output. So if any figures I quote disagree with the shots we show on the video, it's because we film a number of times and it changes throughout the day. But if we look at gas at the moment, look at the grid, gas is producing over 60%, somewhere around about 65% of all our electricity. Wind and solar are down about 15% combined, and there's a few other bits. There's nuclear, there's hydro, pumped hydro, and there's the interconnector as well. And all these will be up for you to be able to see. But that's a snapshot. This is 6th of November, and it has been a really weird time out there. I noticed it first with my garden lights. I've got a lot of these solar garden lights. I just plant them in the ground, and during the day they charge up. Then at night when it goes dark, they light up, really rather pretty. For the last few days, they've been going out about 5 o'clock. They come on about 4:30 when it goes dark. By 5 o'clock, the battery's gone. So there's been something going on. I've noticed this myself. I've also noticed there's virtually no wind. It's quite amazing. So what I've done is I've looked into the grid over the last week, and it's really quite amazing. I hadn't noticed this. Thank you very much for everyone who pointed this out to me. But this has been going on for well over a week. The wind is very, very low. The solar is really low as well. And the bulk of the electricity being produced on our national grid is now gas and nuclear. Those are taking about 80–85% of the whole grid. Renewables putting very little in, a little bit from the interconnector, a little bit from pumped hydro, and that's it. And this is very interesting. So go back a little bit further, and this didn't apply. If you look back over the last year, you'll find it's totally different. That the renewables is about 40–50%. The fossil fuel is about 30 or 40%, and a little bit from nuclear and everything else. It's total turnaround. And this is really interesting because what's happening when we get into the weather, you find that we're in a particularly strange weather environment, and that is we've got a high pressure lodged somewhere out into the Atlantic, and that's holding off some of the fronts that were coming through. Do you remember we had all that massive amount of rain coming through? That was giving us a lot of wind, and the wind generated electricity was a very high percentage. But we've got a high pressure now, and it's blocking all those fronts coming through. And with that, it's locked us into a pressure system which is pretty static, and it's been static here for quite a time. On the contrary, on the flip side of that, if you look at Spain, they've been having flooding forever. It just keeps raining there. This has been going on now for well over a week in Spain. Massive floods, torrential rain. And when it moves away from one part, which might be Madrid or Seville, it just moves up the road to another part. And just recently, Barcelona got absolutely deluged with that sort of flooding. And many of you will know I spent some time, I had 10 days off in Menorca recently, and we had glorious weather. A few clouds some days, but it was up in the mid-20s, 26, 27 most of the time. Sunshine every day, nice and sunbathing, nice relaxation. Look at that today, and that's getting torrential rain, thunderstorms, lightning. So we're in a very unusual weather pattern. Now, before anyone says it, this is not an excuse for why renewable energies are failing the grid. This is part of the operation of the grid. You need to go back to the 70s Back then, the grid was mostly coal-fired power stations, and we were starting to bring in the gas turbines as well, and very little in the way of nuclear. And of course, in the 70s, those of a certain age will remember we had the 3-day week. We also had rolling blackouts, and it's the only time since the grid's been in existence where the grid was giving us blackouts. In the 70s, the reason for it was the miners went on strike. And the miners were the ones who dug out the coal. They picketed all the power stations, and the power stations ran out of coal. So they had to ration any existing stockpiles of coal, and they did it by giving us regular blackouts. You'd get a timetable for those who remember this, and the timetable would say every Monday, Wednesday, Friday between 4 and 7, your electricity will be off. And it was. And I, at the time, was living at a house in Newquay. It was a winter let. We were in between selling one property and buying another, and we were in a Polwheel Close in Newquay. We were all electric, and it was a strange one because it was an all electric house. It had ceiling electric heating. A lot of people know you get underfloor heating, you put elements in the floor. We had ceiling heating. Really weird, because if you come in on a cold day and you'd been away and your heating was off, you turn the heating on, you sit there and you're shivering and you get no benefit from it. And you're thinking, I don't think that heating's working. And then when you stand up, you go, oh, it's warm up here. It was a weird arrangement. But over time, give it an hour or so, that heat came down into the room and it was okay. But we actually had, it's the only time I've ever known it, we had planned scheduled blackouts from the grid because they couldn't get enough fuel. And we got that at the moment. We can't get enough fuel from the wind or the solar. So we're in a situation, and I think this is a real praise to the national grid that we haven't got blackouts. We haven't been told don't use electricity. They've just upped the other sources, they've upped the gas output, and we got some really quite modern and high capacity gas turbines out there. We also up the nuclear a little bit, but we've also got the interconnector now. We can drag in electricity from other countries, but we're finding that they also are suffering. They also, in France, for example, they had to turn the nuclear generators up because their wind and solar is suffering as well. So this is all to do with the resilience of the grid, but some people were there going, oh, I told you so, this is why we can't have a renewable grid. I'm going to tell you now why they're wrong. Renewable does not mean wind. It does not mean solar. What renewable means is it's a source of energy that nature provides us with that doesn't have an impact on the environment. So the common ones, the really easy ones, and particularly at the moment the cheaper ones, are wind farms and solar panels. And an awful lot of my viewers, they've got solar panels on their house. And the reason is it reduces their electricity bill sufficiently to make the final electricity bill for the house really quite negligible. It also means if your car's there during the day and it's a sunny day, you can actually fill your car totally from your house, effectively free. Sunlight, panels, inverter, car. It's really simple. So those are the common ones that we see all the time, and the reason they are very common is because they are the cheapest form of electricity you can buy at the moment. Whatever else is on offer, whether it's nuclear or gas or coal-fired, oil-fired, whatever it is, cheapest form of energy you can get at the moment is solar farm with a mega pack battery backup. So you have a battery pack alongside your solar farm, and anything that the grid doesn't use goes into the batteries for use when the solar panels are not performing, i.e. it's dark or we have dull and foggy weather. They happen to be the cheaper, so everyone's piling into them. But what a lot of people forget is that renewable energy covers an awful lot more than that. There's a number of projects going on that we seem to be totally ignoring. Well, the first of those, I come from Cornwall, and down in Cornwall we had the Hot Rocks project. I say had, we still have. There is a company down there and they drill down into the granite. Cornwall is mostly granite, and there's a residual heat down there. The further down you drill, the hotter it gets. And this is why, for example, the original Neanderthals all lived in caves. If you go into a cave, if you get away from the entrance where there's heat loss, but get into the cave structure itself, and they're a constant 50 degrees Fahrenheit, about 10, 12 degrees centigrade all year round. It's not warm, but it's not cold. And if you just put a bear jacket, bear skin on, or a fox coat or something, you'll be perfectly comfortable inside a cave, even when it's snowing and icy outside. So there's heat in the ground, and that's basically the planet. The planet has a molten core. So as you go deeper, there's more and more heat down there. Norway's a big one looking into this as well. They've got a first project they started in 2020, and they're now trying to tap into some of the heat sources that are there. They have geysers there. We don't have them in this country, not that I'm aware of anyhow. We just have a reasonable temperature in the hot rocks. But in Norway, they do have geysers, they have volcanoes, they do have geothermal as well. And that's a constant source. It's always there. You can take it out. It doesn't deplete the stock because it's constantly being added to. The sun lands on the planet absorbs it, etc. And we have a balance. So there's geothermal heat. Now, Cornwall, the Hot Rocks project, there's not very much money gone into it, but it seems to be coming up with some good figures. And what they're saying is that they believe in Cornwall alone, there is sufficient heat down there to run the whole of the UK. That would be lovely for Cornwall. It was a big tourist industry driven county. It's fading a lot with the cheap holidays abroad. If Cornwall could actually be the power station for the whole of the UK, I think that would be fantastic. But there's a lot of energy down there. Then you've got to look at down in Cornwall. One of the reasons down there is a very keen surfer, so you've got wave power. Big waves down there. We've got Newquay, we've got something called a cribber, and that gets up to about 20 or 30 feet. These are scary. These are taller than a house. These are scary waves. I'm not a great proponent of wave power, not at that scale, because waves basically are trying to destroy things. So there's an awful lot of wear and tear and damage. However, they have, in Hawaii, for example, where we've got the 40, 50-foot waves, they have measured them, and they found that one of the breaking waves at one of the big North Shore locations would power New York for a whole day, one wave. So it's just trying to find something where you can get the energy out of it without it being smashed to bits by the wave itself. But there's some measure there for some energy. If you go further out, away from the breaking waves, this is where they're just beginning to feel the effect of the bottom, and you've got a swell, and things will bob up and down, and those will produce energy as well. So there's energy there. Bigger one than that, though, is tidal. We have in the UK one of the largest tidal ranges in the whole world. I think we're beaten by Canada. There's one bay up there which is better. But if you can imagine, let's say you've got a bay, every day the tide will come in, it floods the bay, and then every day it goes out, comes back in and goes out. Twice a day we get a high tide, twice a day we get a low tide. And there was a project in Swansea Bay, for example. This was quite a few years ago. And they wanted to build an island in the middle. It was a mile in diameter in the middle of the bay, and it was a hollow tube. And in the side of the walls of the tube, there were turbines and shutters. So the principle was really simple. When the tide comes in, it will come in and go in through all of these openings, and the tide rises and rises and rises until it reaches high tide. Now, if the high tide happens to be 3 o'clock in the morning when there's very little demand for electricity, all these holes in the side, they close the shutters. And they now had this column of water, which is a mile in diameter and maybe 10, 15, 20 meters in height. And it's a huge energy store. It's like pumped hydro. And then when people started getting up and turning the kettles on, they would just open up these shutters, and as the water poured out, it would go past a turbine, it would generate energy. And so every day this one filled up and emptied twice a day. Huge amount of power would be going into it. It's been stalled for the moment. A lot of political reasons, not going to go into it, but some of the oil companies objected because a little particular newt might be displaced and therefore they got the whole project scrapped. But that's another story. So we got tidal, and there's so much scope for tidal. The main advantage of tidal is that we know you can go into a shop and buy a tide table. Can't remember the name of them now. But you get a tide table, and these tell you the high and low tides for the next 10 years, and they tell you the height of the tide. So you get spring tides and neap tides. So we know all this in advance. It's an endless source of renewable energy. And we know exactly it's going to be there every day. The tides will never stop. If the tides stop, I think the planet's got a bit of a problem. So this doesn't suffer like wind or solar. We've also, of course, got the traditional pumped hydro, where during peak times we got loads of electricity. You pump water uphill to a reservoir, and then during demand you just open it. And there's one in Trosvanath in Wales, which is a hydro one. That's an active one, still working today. And of course, the beauty of them is if you've got water up the top and you're really short, you can open up one of the sluice gates and there's power instantly. The water, you've seen the water spouting out of these things, turning a turbine. Very useful. So there's a lot going there. We've also got, of course, the perennial one, nuclear fusion. Now, nuclear fusion is not nuclear fission. Nuclear fission is what we've got. This is where we split atoms and we get exotic things coming off, and several of those are seriously radioactive, and that gives a big problem. I'm not a supporter of nuclear, and it's nothing to do with nuclear. In the Navy, I was on nuclear submarines, nuclear ships. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. The big issue I have is that we still have not yet found what to do with the waste. When I was a service engineer with Honeywell, I went into Sellafield. That was one of my customers. And if you go into Sellafield, anything you touch or wear has to be disposed of sensibly. I don't think I ever went in anywhere that was in any particular risk, but some of the engineers who do, everything they wear, everything they touch becomes radioactive. Statistics show there's about 1 million cubic meters of waste product up there, which is sufficiently radioactive not to be able to throw it away, not to be able to burn it or put it into landfill. It's not dangerous. It is radioactive though, and enough of it, there's a sensible amount of radioactivity. There's also the really hardcore stuff. Now, they say that half-life of some of this is 10,000 years. There's very little out there that has really got any much potency after about 1,000 years, and a lot of it within 10, 20 years. It's down to what I call a sensible level. But the killer for me is that they've never found a way of getting rid of this. They're talking these days about going underground, finding deep caves and putting it in there. So, but it's a problem because if the rain goes in there and that becomes an aquifer, then that will pick up radioactivity. And if we then start drinking that water, the problem. Also, if there's an earthquake, so any special ceiling could be broken open and the radioactivity escapes. So nobody today has actually solved this problem. And I personally would like no more new nuclear power stations until someone has found out how to get rid of all the old stuff, because the first nuclear power stations, the UK, came in the 50s up in Cumbria, and the waste from that is still around today. It hasn't been disposed of permanently. Loads of different ideas, shoot it into space. Yeah, that's great. What happens if the rocket crashes, it comes back to Earth? You've now got 50 tons of nuclear waste landing on wherever it lands. So nuclear fusion is very different. Nuclear fusion is where you force two elements together, two atoms together, and when they join, overcoming the nuclear bond, they release just pure energy. So there's no radioactivity involved. It's zero. They are not radioactive. So I've got no problem with that. The only problem the scientists have got, they can't get it working. They have reached a stage where they can get out of it as much energy as they put in. Useless as a generating station. yeah, you've got to put in as much energy as anyone's going to get out. It is getting better. They are hopeful, but the figures are absolutely staggering. If you take a kilo of nuclear material like uranium, plutonium, and put it in a nuclear power station, nuclear fission generator reactor, the nuclear fusion will give 4 times as much energy as that. That's it. It's 4 for 1. No radiation waste. So any waste you get, any materials that you use in building it, you can just get rid of in the normal way. But for the same kilogram of fossil fuel, this is coal, oil or gas, it's 4 million times greater. 4 million. Effectively, you could keep the whole of the planet going forever, just on a couple of kilos of the raw material. So this is the future. They can't get it going. It is effectively renewable because you are changing. It is a fuel. So you'll take, for example, a water atom molecule and you will mix it and you'll get isotopes coming out, and you mix those isotopes and those are the ones that you fuse together. So effectively you're using up water. But you're getting back something else. When these two mix together, you'll get back helium. So it's recycling, in effect, not burning a fuel. It's just recycling. But it's not working. And in the future, we're probably going to get something better than anything I've talked about in this video. I don't know what it's going to be. Could be nuclear fusion, could be Star Trek, isn't it? Dilithium crystals, whatever they use to power the USS Enterprise. If it can power a spaceship, fly it through space at warp speed with 6,000 or 7,000 people on board and everything it does, that's all generated on board, then that would easily run a city or possibly a country. So that's for the future. But the other big thing that we need to be doing is reducing our usage. When we had the COVID, it's only 4 years ago now, when we had the COVID virus and we got the lockdowns, energy consumption changed dramatically. Use of petrol and diesel out on the roads fell to virtually nothing, but energies inside the home increase. So we can change the usage of electricity. We still have houses out there that have tungsten bulbs. You can't buy them anymore, but some people have stockpiled the old ones. The new LED lights are very much more efficient, maybe 1/10 of the power. People really need to start looking at the houses, but the main one you need to look at is the heat loss, because an awful lot of our energy goes into heating houses and offices and buildings, and most of those are not very efficient at insulation. So before we start increasing grid size and everything else, I think it'd be a really good idea to just start reducing the amount of energy the country actually needs. In time, we'll do that through something like heat pumps, and the heat pumps, really ingenious devices. If you don't understand them, think of a fridge. If you take I know you shouldn't do this, but if you take a warm bowl of porridge and put it in your fridge, what the fridge does is, when you close the door, it takes the heat out of the porridge and puts it round the back onto that grill. That grill on the back is always warm. So what it's doing is it's taking heat out of the fridge and it's putting it round the back. And that's a heat pump, a very basic heat pump. And the heat pumps have one huge advantage. If you have an electric fire with a 1 kilowatt bar for heating a room, you plug it in, you'll take 1 kilowatt of electricity, run it for an hour, you've burned a kilowatt hour of electricity, you get a kilowatt of heat. Simple as that, 100% efficient. If you look at a heat pump, because it doesn't produce heat, it just moves it. So in a domestic situation, a heat pump, all you do is you take the inside shelves, you've got all those coils under the shelf, take those, put them outside, and take the back of the fridge and put it inside your house, switch it on, and what it will do, all those shelf coils will pick up heat from outside, bring it inside, and you get nice warm inside. So they're moving heat, and the heat they're moving is produced by the sun. So it's really simple. Your sun heats up the ground heats up the air in contact with it. These shelves get warm, they pump the heat inside. So you're not making heat, you're just moving it. Nature's making it for free, renewably, you're just moving it inside. The heat pumps, as a general rule, have a coefficient of 3, 4, or 5 to 1. That means if you put 1 kilowatt of electricity, 1 kilowatt hour of electricity into a heat pump, it can move 3, 4, or 5 kilowatts of heat into the house. It literally is heat for nothing. Nature heats it outside, you just move it inside. And so if we all had heat pumps, then we would see a drop of about anywhere between 20, 30, 40% of our heating bill. Could be an awful lot higher. And it's using renewable energy. If the electricity that runs the heat pump is also produced by wind farms and solar PV, then you're running your heating virtually for nothing. And that is why it's surprising me when people don't want to look at heat pumps. There are challenges. They're not that brilliant at producing really hot temperatures very quickly. So if you've been away over the winter and your house is stone cold and you come back, they take absolutely forever to bring the house up to temperature. It's what they do. But they're not meant to be used like that. They're meant to be run in the background all the time, like your fridge. Go to your fridge right now, touch the back of it, it'll be warm. You may not have opened the door for ages, but there's still warmth there. And so these systems are meant to be running pretty much all the time. And if you can have solar panels on your roof, you can run them free of charge. So that's renewable energy, and that's reducing the amount of energy that we use in our house. Boilers have two problems. One, they're using fossil fuels, bad for the environment. Two, they're not very efficient. In terms of the actual efficiency, yeah, people will tell you, they're 95% efficient these days. Yeah, that's 95% efficient at turning the gas that goes into it into heat. What they don't tell you about is how the gas got to your house, and that is, yeah, it's dug up somewhere in the Arctic or the Arabian Gulf, and then it's shipped here through pipelines and everything else, through distributors and everything else. And that bit of it, the getting it out of the ground, is very dirty indeed, very power intensive. So I know the 95% stated, but it's not the true story. So there's an awful lot we can do, and what that will do is that will increase the resilience of the grid. So if we can start getting a mix, go back to what it used to be. If you look back 30, 40, 50 years, we had the lot. We had gas, we had coal, we had oil, we had pumped hydro, we had river turbines, we had nuclear power stations. You know, there's a multitude of sources. Why would anyone think that renewable just needs two, wind and solar? It's not true. We need a big variety of renewable sources. It'll be some geothermal, it'll be some nuclear fusion if it ever gets working. It'll be some tidal, some wave, some wind, some solar PV. It's all there. And then as a backup, we also have the interconnectors. So the grid today is remarkably resilient. We haven't had blackouts. The only blackouts we get when you have a storm and it actually brings down a cable or a pylon or main power supply. And that's physical damage, you can't get over that. But there's been no actual blackouts I'm aware of. So what we need to do is we need to, I say we, this is the government, needs to realise that you can't live just on solar and wind. As we know at the moment, there is no wind. I watched a video recently because I heard there was a new wind turbine out for use on a roof, and so I was watching it, and I know some guy bought one, he put it up, and he said for a whole week it didn't turn. He kept going out spinning it by hand because he thought, is it jammed or something? And then one day it just suddenly started working. We have to plan for all this. We have to get a lot of battery storage, but it's going to be a combination of things, and also into that mix you can put your EV, because you've got a battery storage there. If you buy a battery pack for your house, these are typically 10 or 15 kilowatt hours of storage. The average car has 50, and the average car uses maybe 6, 7 or 8 kilowatt hours per day. That's it. So you're sat out there with a huge battery. When all of those cars are plugged in and we have vehicle to grid connections, what the grid can do is actually use all the cars to store energy when there's plenty of it, and to draw from those cars when there isn't enough coming in from other sources. So the EV cars themselves will become power generators. And don't worry, the grid is not going to drain your car totally flat so you can't use it, nor will it lock your car so you can't go and drive to work. Those are silly comparisons. What you will do is you'll say to you'll have an app, and you'll say to the app, right, I never want my power level to go below 40% or 50%, whatever figure you choose and you're comfortable with. And that must be enough for you to do normal daily driving. So first of all, you're never going to flatten the battery. You're always going to reserve it. And secondly, you just tell the car when you can give energy back to the grid and when you need it. It's not rocket science. So all of this is going to give us a very resilient grid to the future. And we're starting to see this now. We're going to, I think they actually launched a video about Oasis in California, where they have this. They have solar panels. There's a huge number, 11 kilowatts or something. They've got mega packs over there, 39 megawatt hours, I think. And they have 168 Tesla V3 chargers. And they are virtually off grid. The only power coming into the site is a 1 megawatt connection, which is not a lot. It is running off the panels and it's putting it into the mega packs. It's also taking some of that electricity coming in when it's really cheap and storing that in the batteries as well. We're going to have to get a lot more localized, where houses and areas and communities will be producing their own power, still connected to the grid as a backup. But then if we have a time like this when we don't have any wind and we don't have any solar and my garden lamps go out, it's not the end of the world. It'll pass, and next week will probably be high pressure moved off and we're back into weather fronts coming through, rain, wind, showers, torrential rain, thunder, the whole lot, typical UK winter. So we just need to get through these brief periods. So thanks very much for watching. I'm Dave. If you've enjoyed this, please click the like button. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe. It does help us as a channel. So I'm Dave.